So the common question that I often get is, how do you establish these correlations? And I always kind of shy away from being too dependent on a correlation. What I really try to hope that I find by looking at the Dow dollar push-pull. And here's how I differentiate correlation from causality. And it's not just semantics. It's really a difference of what's driving the market and making sure that I'm not just trying to fit the market into some sort of template, fit the market into some sort of easy to recognize and reliable kind of relationship. That's the last thing I want to do, because I know the market's always adjusting and there's always different psychology and so forth. So a correlation would be something like the dollar's moving lower and therefore the Dow's moving higher. That would be a correlation. And a lot of people, I'd say about 18 months ago, this kind of stopped. But before that, it was really almost tick for tick. If the Dow started heading up or equity started accelerating higher, the Dow would be sold. I'm sorry, the dollar would be sold. So strong Dow, weak dollar, right? That was the correlation. But if we did not stop to say what's the causality, at some point, like I said, about 18 months ago, when everybody was still very reliant on this whole dollar strength, Dow weakness, or Dow weakness, dollar strength, that back and forth, what happened is that correlation began to really erode. And you can even see it here on this chart. Look at the uptrend in the daily dollar, and then look at the uptrend on the Dow. These did have an inverse correlation, and I wouldn't call them correlated now. They just happen to have been moving up together. Okay? I wouldn't call them correlated when they were moving up higher, because they had had years of inverse correlation, where a flight to safety was to buy the dollar, and when there was a risk environment, risk appetite, you bought equities. So what happened here? Well, again, don't look at it as correlation. You got to look now at causality. What caused them to stop moving in that inverse way, and what caused them to start moving up together? Correlation insinuates that they're affecting one another. And I wouldn't say that that's always the case. You know, sometimes, in fact, they do. But sometimes they don't. And we can see here in this situation with the dollar moving up higher and the Dow moving up higher, they really weren't affecting each other. I don't think the risk environment that's been pushing the Dow up higher was necessarily the reason the dollar was moving up higher, right? It was a completely different set of causes. So I always want to make sure that I differentiate correlation and causality. And the guys from Freakonomics did a great job of this. They did it far better than I'll ever explain it. And this is the best way that I can explain the difference between correlation and causality, and why it's so dangerous to rely on correlations without understanding the underlying reasons for the movement, whether it be inverse or sympathetic. Now, if you haven't checked out the Freakonomics movie, awesome movie. All right. In fact, over at the same site that I was just showing you guys earlier, there is a webinar playback over at tradeforexfutures.com. I had a webinar playback. Oh, there it is. And you can check that out. And I talked about exactly that conversation here in this webinar playback. And you can access this for free over at tradeforexfutures.com. In fact, right now I'm re-editing this video, so it's a little bit better. So if you want to come back and check it out in maybe another week, you can do that too. But one of the things that I talked about in this webinar, and I'll kind of give you a quick refresh of it here, is that when the Freakonomics, and there's a movie about it, this is from the Freakonomics movie, if you haven't checked it out, awesome movie. So they talked about during summer, polio incidents in children would go up. And you know, this is a horrible disease. It was a something that people just feared. So obviously, psychologically speaking, people were trying to find what the cause of polio was, and especially inflicting children. You know, it's nothing more horrific, right? So people were looking for a reason, and I think I stress that because I think if we're really looking for something, our brains will link things up even when there's no reason to it. So be careful when you are on a very frenzied path of trying to find a solution, because your brain will link things up just to give you an answer. So they found that with the rise in polio incidence in children over summer, there was also simultaneously a rise in ice cream consumption. Well, what's the causality of polio? What's the causality of people wanting to have ice cream in the summer? And are they correlated? Well, both those charts, if you were to lay them up as charts, they move together. You know, all of a sudden during summer, boom, there goes polio, and boom, there goes ice cream. So obviously, people stepped back and they did what? They linked together ice cream and polio. That obviously there had to be something in the ice cream. And for a while, until the true causality of polio was discovered, there was this correlation that was discovered, and ice cream was vilified between ice cream and polio. Do you see the difference? And we can look back at it now because we know ice cream was not the culprit, right? But there's your correlation, right? There's the movement higher in ice cream, there's the movement higher in polio, yet the causality really isn't that. At some point, people are going to say, no, ice cream consumption was higher for a completely different reason. It was summer and kids were out of school, and that's why the ice cream consumption went up. It was hot, right? But that's not necessarily why polio was going up. So hopefully that really drove home, and I think they do a much better job of it than I'll ever do, is that's the difference between causality and correlation. So my warning, my advice is be aware of that. Make sure you're not making the polio ice cream correlation. It might look justified on the chart, but you're really not finding the root of it, which is the causality. And sometimes we'll have both. We'll have causality and correlation. You know, I think a perfect example would be to look at something like the Aussie yen and the Dow. Let's go take a peek at that.